room has two temperatures, hot or cold? Here's an earring evidently somebody found. Okay, questions on the homework?
Page 132, number 11.
Says the center is at 3, 5, and the radius is square root of 6. We're writing the equation of the circle. To write the equation of the circle, you go x minus the x value squared, y minus the y value squared is equal to r squared. This is the radius, this is r squared, so r squared says to take the square root of 6 and square it, and that just removes the radical. (137) number 10 says y is 2x squared minus 6x plus 4. Now, if you're x squared but y is to the first, this is a parabola. And a parabola, if it's not written with a parentheses squared, we have to remember that to find the vertex, x, is negative b over 2a. So I put a negative, b this time is negative 6 over 2 times a. That makes it 6 over 4 or 3 halves. Now, once you know the vertex, the x part of it, we go 2 times 3 halves squared minus 6 times 3 halves plus 4. 2 times 9/4 minus 9 plus 4. The 2 goes into here, so I have 9/2 minus 5. So I have 9/2, and 5 is 10/2, so y is a negative 1/2. Now, you could have gone to your calculator and said that 3 divided by 2 is 1.5, and you could go 2 times 1.5 squared minus 6 times 1.5 plus 4. So you could have gone to a fraction here, gone to a decimal and used your calculator to get this negative 1/2. Now, to find the extra points, we usually added 1 to it, so if this is 3/2, 1 would be 5/2, and you can add 1 to it, or you can think that this number is 1.5, you could go to 2 and then 3. Rather than adding 1, if you don't want to work with fractions, I'm just going to take my next number to be 2 and go 2 times... Oh. Normally we added 1 to this number, but if you added 1 to this, you got 5/2. And again, if you went to your calculator and did it with your decimal, 5/2 isn't that bad. But instead of going 1, I'm just going to the next larger number. So I could work with 5/2, and especially if I used a calculator, that wouldn't be hard. But I'm just going to the next largest number and picked 2. Eight minus 12 plus 4 is 0. And then I'm going to pick 3. Nine, 18 minus 18 plus 4 is 4. So now to graph it, my vertex is at 1.5, negative 1. 1.5, negative 1. Oh, 1.5, negative 1/2. And then 2, 0, and 3 up to 4. When I draw an imaginary line through the vertex, this point is just, since this went through 1/2, this is just half a step away. And this was at 3, so it's actually 1.5, so 1.5. Okay, what else on the homework? Okay, no more on the homework? Page 115, section 2.6. Now, we graphed by finding the vertex and any 2 points, but sometimes you're asked to find the intercepts of a graph. We've looked at intercepts when we graphed straight lines. To find the x-intercept, you let y equal 0. When y is 0, you do not move up and down, so you stay on the x-axis. To find the y-intercepts, you let x equal 0. Just whichever intercept you want, you let the other letter be 0. So that's 2 points that we could always find. Let y be 0, let x be 0. I don't graph parabolas that way because they're not always the easiest or the best points to graph parabolas with. But they are sometimes important, so a lot of different equations we have to know how to find the intercepts. If I have y equals x minus 2 squared minus 9, and I want to know the x-intercept. To find the x-intercept, you let y be 0. If you let y be 0, now here you could square this and work it out, but we've looked at these before where you have a parenthesis squared. I want to move the 9 to the other side, and once you get the parenthesis squared by itself, you simply take the square root, but if you take the square root, you have to put the plus and minus. So when I took the square root to get rid of that parenthesis squared, I get plus and minus 3 is x minus 2. So this is just like solving the quadratic equations we've done before when I let the y be 0. But we have to remember that when you have no square root here, we can't leave it plus and minus 3. We have to go 3 is x minus 2, and negative 3 is x minus 2. So when I add 2, 5 is x, add 2, negative 1 is x. So I actually ended up with 2 x-intercept at 5, 0, and negative 1, 0. The reason you end up with 2 is if you remember a parabola, a lot of times it crosses at 2 different places. That's not this graph because that's not the same, but so we can have 2 x-intercepts here. Then to find the y-intercept, and I should have left myself room, to find the y-intercept I let x be 0. So if I let x be 0, I'm going y, 0 minus 2 squared minus 9. And that gives me negative 2 squared minus 9. 4 minus 9 is negative 5. So this was where we let x be 0, and we got minus 5. Now we can have 2 x-intercepts, but we'll never have but 1 y-intercept. Again, if you imagine what your picture looks like, it's only going to cross the y line once, even though it can cross the x-axis twice. Is that okay on that example? The next example, to let y be 0. The first step is to let y be 0, so 0 equals x minus 1 squared plus 16. Again, if I see that parentheses squared, I'm going to subtract 16 and then take the square root. Now, we looked at solving these before. If I add 1 to both sides, I have 1 plus and minus 4i. So we've solved equations with imaginary in them. When we take the square root of a negative, we call that an imaginary number. But even though we solved them, when I go to graph them, I can't graph an imaginary number. If I can't graph an imaginary number, that says that there are no x-intercepts. Even though we've looked at solving them, so I actually could have quit right here as soon as I saw that there was a negative under the square root. We've solved these before, but you cannot graph an imaginary number. So if you can't graph it, then there's actually no x-intercepts. And again, if you imagine, sometimes we had a parabola like this, and it didn't ever cross the x-axis. If it's either totally above or it could have been totally below the axis, sometimes there are no intercepts. So when I look for the x-intercepts, I don't know if I'm going to have 2 or 0, or if the vertex is on there, I could have exactly 1. So we can have 0, 1, or 2 x-intercepts. To find the y-intercept is when you put x to be 0, 0 minus 1 squared plus 16. You will always have a y-intercept, but you might not have an x-intercept. Okay then? The x-intercepts, again, is where you let y be 0. Now here, if I subtract a 5, I have negative x minus 2 squared. And before I take the square root, I'm going to multiply everything times negative 1. Or you might have moved the parentheses in the first place, but we want the parentheses by itself with nothing in front of it. Now when I take the square root, I've got plus and minus 5. Add 2, I have 2 plus and minus the square root of 5. Now if I did want to graph this, I would go to my calculator and take 2, add the square root of 5. But since I'm not graphing it, I don't need to know that exact number. I don't need to know where it would be on the graph. 2 plus the square root of 5, 0. And 2 minus the square root of 5, 0. Here we usually write it as 2 points so that you can see there would be 2 places rather than leave it to plus and minus. But I wouldn't count off if you just wrote plus and minus. Again, if you were graphing it, you'd just go to your calculator and find out the square root of 5 so you'd know where to put it on the graph. The y-intercept, 0 minus 2 squared plus 5. Now when you square the negative 2, you get a 4, but this negative is still out front. That negative out front is not squared, so you have negative 4 plus 5, y equals 1. Okay, right here. Okay, on page 116 now. Again, we're finding the intercepts. To find the x-intercepts, and that's a typo, that needs to be an x squared there. To find the x-intercept, we put 0 where the y is. Here, make sure it's equal to 0, and then see if you can factor it. Minus says 1 plus 1 minus. Negative 3x plus 4x does give me a 1x. Intercepts should always be written as a point. Don't stop at x equal negative 4. The point here was that y was 0, so you have negative 4, 0, and 3, 0. To find the y-intercept, you let x be 0. Okay on that one? Again, we start by letting y be 0. And we factor. Minus 4 plus 1 is a minus 3. You always have to check your outer plus your inner to make sure you have the middle term. Minus 4 plus 1. The y-intercepts Now, let the y equal 0. But this time if I tried to factor it, 1 times 5 is never going to add to a negative 2. So if you can't factor it, here's where we always have to go to the quadratic formula. Negative b plus or minus b squared minus 4ac over 2a. Now, as soon as I see I have got a negative here under the square root, we've worked these before, we can simplify these, but for graphing purposes, as soon as you see there's an imaginary, there are no x-intercepts. This would have been a positive 16, and we could have gone ahead and simplified it out. But as soon as there's a negative under the square root, we cannot graph it, so there are no x-intercepts. The y-intercept, I have 0 squared, 2 times 0. Nope. What'd I do?
It's supposed to be a negative.
Oh. Oh, well that changed the whole problem, doesn't it? Oh boy, now we can simplify this. Okay. Now if I have 2 plus and minus square root of 24 over 2. '24 we say is 4 times 6 So it's 2 square roots of 6. 2 plus or minus 2 square roots of 6. Now we can never reduce, if you can just divide one number, we can never divide under the radical, but once you bring it outside of the radical, if you can divide every piece, we've got 1 plus or minus 1 square root of 6. So one intercept is 1 plus square root of 6, and the other one is 1 minus the square root of 6. Okay, on page 117, these are a good practice on the intercepts because there's the two kinds. We have two kinds of problems on finding the intercept. We have parentheses squared, and we have x squared x equal, and we have x squared x then a number. So we have two different times we have to know how to find the intercept. When I let the y equal 0, the parentheses squared, we're always going to get the parentheses by itself and take the square root. So first we add the 4. And take the square root. The square root gives me plus and minus 2. And if there is no radical, I have to go 2 and negative 2. When I add 3, I get 5 and 1. Now, always to remember to write intercepts as points. I didn't put the nice little blank up here for the x-intercept and the y-intercept, but if I let the y be 0, then that's a point where x is 5, y is 0. Don't leave it x equal 5, x equal 1. Always write your intercepts as points. When we let x be 0, I have 0 minus 3 squared minus 4. Now if I want to find the intercepts, when I let y be 0, if there's a parentheses, we take the square root. If it's x squared x number, we see if we can factor it. Negative on the end says 1 plus 1 minus. Negative 4 plus 5 is a plus 1. And then if we let x be 0, and now I want to look at the back of the book for the review for number 2.
291.
The first problem is going to say to find the slope. And we have to know 2 different ways to find the slope. y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. We have to memorize this formula. We have to practice plugging it in so that we can work the formula. The other is if I have an equation, you have to solve for y. We have to know the formula, or we have to know to solve for y, because if I have an equation, the slope is the number on x. Slope is the number that's in front of x. It's not the x, it's just the number that's in front of x. So number one, if I don't know the slope, but I'm given 2 points. 2 points, we say y from the second minus y from the first. X from the second minus x. Now we have to be careful with the negatives because subtract a negative makes it plus. So I have 11 over 3. Now again, on this review sheet, I've given you several to practice, so you can come back and practice on this. I don't grade the review sheet like part of the homework, but doing the review sheet is the best way to see what you need to work on for the test. So I won't work all of them here, but you need to go back and make sure you know how to work. This one would be worked just like number one, but whenever the y is already solved for, if it says y equal, the slope is just the number in front of x. It's not the x, it's just that number in front of x. Just had something crawling across my desk. Now, to write the equation of the line, what we have to know we have to know the formula y minus the y value is slope parentheses x minus the x value. So there's some equations here that if we don't memorize these formulas, we're just going to miss a whole lot of problems right off the bat. So make sure you have these formulas memorized, but then you've also got to practice working them enough that you can work them on the test. So whenever it says write the equation, I'm going to start with y minus the y value is equal to slope x minus the x value. So I have y minus 5 is 1/2 x. 2 negatives are going to make this a positive, but 1/2 of 2 is 1. You can go to the side and do the multiplication if you need to, but 1/2 of 2. Add the 5. Y equals 1/2 x plus 6. Again, I've given you plenty here to practice on, but make sure you do practice on these. You have to know the formula and know how to do it. Also, when we get down to where we have 2 points, if you don't know the slope. If you're supposed to write the equation of the line, the first thing you have to do is figure out what the slope is. This time I have to use the formula to say y from the second minus y over x minus x. That should be minus the -4 there. So I have 1 That becomes 2 plus 4 is 1/6. More paper. Now, once you find the slope, you pick either one of the points, and I'm just gonna pick, well, it doesn't matter which points you pick, and if I don't wanna work with negatives, I'm gonna pick the point 2, 9. You can pick either point, you'll get the same answer. I'm gonna go y minus the y value is 1/6 x minus the x value. I could have just as easily picked -4, 8, but I thought maybe I wouldn't work with the negative. So y minus 9 is 1/6 x, 1/6 times 2 over 1. I get 1/3. Add 9. We come over here and say -1/3 plus 9/1. Common denominator has to be a 3. If I multiply by 3, I get a 27. Again, there's plenty to practice on here, but if there's several of them on the review sheet, that tells you there's going to be several of these on the test too. So the review sheet kind of lets you know if there's going to be a lot of these, do a lot of practice on this. Now the next page, we have to remember that parallel says to use the same slope. Parallel says same slope, but I don't know the slope of this line. You don't know the slope until it's y equals. So I'm going to take this equation right here and solve it for y. I'm going to subtract the 2x and divide by a -3. Only when you've got y all by itself do you know what the slope is. So if I don't have y equals, I have to make this y equals. So negative over negative tells me that the slope is 2/3. And they gave me a point, so I go y minus the y value is 2/3 x minus the x value. I get 2/3 x. When I multiply 2 over 3 times 2 over 1, I get a -4/3. I'm gonna add 5. Negative 4/3 add 5/1 gives me 11/3. Now, this is the same equation as up here, 2x minus 3y. So if this is the same equation, I know that the slope was a 2/3. If it wasn't the same equation, I'd have to solve for y. The slope is 2/3, but perpendicular says change the sign and flip it over. Once you figure out the slope, change the sign and flip it over. You want the negative reciprocal. So y minus the y value is slope parentheses x minus the x value. Negative times negative is going to be positive. When I multiply here, the 2's are going to cancel. So it's going to give me 3. Add the 5 to both sides. Negative 3/2 x plus 8. Okay. To find the equation of, when we have the equation of line and you want to graph it, the easiest way is to let x be 0. If I let x be 0 and cover up the x, I can see that y is equal to 8. If x is 0, that says that whole term is 0, y is equal to 8. And then I let y be 0. If you let y be 0 and cover up the y, I see that I get 2x is equal to 8. So when I divide by 2, x is equal to 4. So the easiest way here is to let x be 0, find one point, let y be 0, find the other point, 0, 8, 2, 4, 6, 8, and 4, 0. Now again, there's problems you can practice on, so make sure you do extra practice. But then when we just have one letter, when we just have one letter in the equation, make sure you look at the equation and let it tell you what to do. If it says x equal, count on the x-axis. And then we don't want to just copy the axis, so we see it has to go this way. Let the equation say if it's x equal, count on the x-axis. If it's y equal, count on the y-axis. And then again, you don't want to just copy the axis, so it says it's horizontal. Now, these first two pages are all about lines, writing the equation of line, graphing lines. They are going to be half of the test. So you make sure you can do the lines. If you can write the equation of the line, find the slope, graph the lines, then you can make a big portion of this test here. So make sure you've got this part down. You want to build your points right here on the lines. Now we also looked at graphing when we have an x squared and y to the first. This is what we've just done on x squared and y to the first. When I get to the parabolas, I have to remember two ways to find the vertex. One way to find the vertex is to say to yourself, change the sign inside parentheses. Don't change the sign outside the parentheses. Just a little thing to say to yourself to have this memorized. Change the sign inside parentheses. Don't change the sign outside parentheses. So for number 20, if I know that the vertex is 2, 6, change the sign inside, don't change the sign outside. Change the sign inside, don't change the sign outside. The other points that you find are always look at your x and just take the next number. So if I let x be 3, I'm going 3 minus 2 squared plus 6. And then I'm also going to pick x to be a 4. 4 minus 2 squared plus 6. So my ready to graph, I have 2, 6, and 3, 7. Well, 4 is gonna be up here off the graph, I ran out of room here. Now, if you know the vertex and find 2 other points, this just gives you half of the parabola. So what you then do is draw an imaginary line through the vertex. And then this point here, at this place, I'm 1 step away from the imaginary line, so I go 1 step and put a point here. Up here at 10, I'm 2 steps away, so I go 2 steps and finish the parabola. If you know how to, everything on the right, you put 1 just like it on the left. You can finish your parabola. Now, the other thing on the parabola is when it's written y equals ax squared plus bx plus c. If it doesn't have the parentheses squared, then we have to remember to find the vertex x is negative b over 2a. So another little formula here we have to memorize, negative b over 2a. So for 22, I put negative b over 2 times a but that just gives me the x part of the vertex. To find the rest of the vertex, I have to say, if x is negative 1, (3 times 1 minus 6 minus 5). Now again, we look at the x value here, and another point I'm going to pick is 0, so I'm going to go 0, whatever your vertex is, you look at the x, you add 1 to it, and then I'm going to add 1 again and put a 1 in there. Now that should have been a, okay. So now I have the points 1, 4. Oops. 1, 4. 0, negative 5. And negative 1, negative 8. We have to remember which one is the vertex. This one is the vertex, so I curve up from there. An imaginary line up through the vertex. At this point I go 1 step. At this point I go 2 steps. So this one's a parabola, but it's much skinnier than the other ones, and that's because of the 3 up front. But that's the reason we pick enough points to see what it's going to do. But you need to know that once you pick the right side, you put the other points on the left side too. Now, there'll also be some find the intercepts like we did today. Let x be 0, let y be 0. So you'll look at these 3 intercepts, but we just did that today. To find the center and radius. To find the center and radius of the circle, you change the signs inside the parentheses. The vertex said change the sign inside, don't change the sign out. But on the circle, both signs are going to be inside the parentheses. You change the signs inside the parentheses. So my center says if you change the signs, my center is at 2, 3. It's just a little saying you memorize. Change the signs inside the parentheses. And the number on the end is r squared. So if this is r squared, r is 4. I put the center on, and then I count 4 in each direction. And draw my circle. So the circle, it's one that you know what to do. You look at it and you do it. If you don't spend time studying this one, you're just going to miss the circle altogether. Change the signs inside the parentheses. The number on the end is r squared. Now, as you can tell, I don't take off for not having perfect circles, but do make sure that I can tell it's a circle. Once you get these, don't try to draw them with straight lines. Make sure I can tell you knew it was circle sort of shaped. I sure did. Positive 2, 3. So it should have been over here. I sure went the wrong way. Now, if it's not written with parentheses squared, we have to complete the square on both the x and the y. So we start by grouping x squared and x grouping y squared and y, and if there's a number, we would put the number over here. We group the x squared with the x and the y squared with the y. Now this one says b divided by 2 squared. We should have learned that for the first test, but grouping, once we group the x squared and the x, then b divided by 2 squared says 8 divided by 2 squared, 4 squared is 16. But don't forget, if you put a 16 over here, you have to put a 16 on the other side also. Most common mistake is to put a 16, but forget to write it over here. Anything you add on one side, you have to add to the other. And then negative 6 divided by 2 squared, negative 3 squared is 9. When you factor it, take the sign from the middle. Sign from the middle is plus, and to get 16, you need 4 times 4. The sign from the middle this time is a negative, and 9 is 3 times 3. There's my little buddy again. So when I change the signs, the center becomes negative 4 plus 3. When you factor, you have to keep the sign from the middle, but then when you write the center, you have to change the signs. Negative 4 plus 3. This time it is a negative 4, 5, Okay, there will be problems like 29 and 30, but I've typed the formula there, so it's just a matter of plugging in the numbers and working the formula. So those are going to be fairly easy, and I'm not going to do ones like the square root or funny things I did on the homework, so just plug it in and work it out. Now, on the functions part, I'm not going to put in 31 through 36. These won't be here. What happened to 35? Oh, there's 35. So these problems down here will not be on the test. But on the next page, what will be on the test is the evaluate. And these bottoms ones down here, 40 through 44, are not on the test. But the evaluate will be on the test. Evaluate says if f of x plus 2, says I'm going to put x plus 2 everywhere there's an x. It says whatever's in parentheses, put that where there was an x. But here I have to go x plus 2 times x plus 2 minus 3x minus 6 plus 4. Now, we don't try to factor or do anything with this when we're evaluating. It just says put that number in and find the value. Well, in this case, that's all we can do with it. It's not an equation. It doesn't say equals 0 over here. So this is as far as we can go. To find f of 0, it says to put 0 in place of x. That's a 4 if you can't read my... Put negative 3 in place of x. What we have to know here is it's what's in parentheses is your x number. I'm looking for what is the y number. So it says if I look up here and find when x is 3, the y that goes with that is 6. All I want to know is if that's my x, what y goes with it. For f of 0 says if x is 0, what's my y? If x is 0, what's my y? So of the function section, these 3 problems here are the only ones that will be like it on the test. Again, make sure you've done all of your homework, but the review is just for you to practice or not. I don't grade the review. But make sure you can do the lines. If you can do the equations of lines, slope of lines, graphing lines, that should be about half of the test. And you want to build up those points and then get as much as you can on the rest. But really concentrate on the lines. Okay, any questions? We'll see you Monday. A couple of people missed yesterday. If you did, I have a copy of the notes here. If you want a copy of the notes from yesterday.
Are these like copies I can take home, or?
Yeah,
is
yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Can I ask you come a bit earlier today?
Yeah, I'm in there anywhere between 1:30, so anytime after that.
About yesterday, I went to history, and my teacher had forgotten, he said yes to me, and he's like, I had a really important lecture today.
Now, if you start this, you might be a little late to history class. Okay.
Yesterday was more.
Okay, if that, yesterday was the important one then. Yeah.